we protect our own. The words hit heavy as 200 leather-clad bikers filled every corner of Emily's struggling diner. 24 hours earlier, she had stood up for a lone Hell's Angel when local cops harassed him. What happened next would leave an entire town in tears. Emily Parker's hands were chapped and red as she wiped down the sticky counter at Parker's diner for the third time that hour. The lunch rush, if you could call 8 customers a rush, had ended, and she was mentally calculating if today's take would cover the electric bill that sat unopened in her purse. The final notice stamp had bled through the envelope. "Just a few more months," she muttered, tucking a strand of brown hair behind her ear. It was the same empty promise she'd been making herself for 18 months now. Ever since her father's massive stroke had put him in a care facility and her in charge of the family diner. Her nursing career in the city, her apartment, her life, all put on hold for a small-town greasy spoon that was bleeding money faster than she could bandage the wounds. The ancient ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, barely moving the humid summer air. Outside, Brookfield's main street was quiet, as it always was these days since the factory had cut the third shift. The bank had foreclosed on 3 businesses already this year. Some days, Emily wondered if Parker's diner would be next. The bell above the door jingled, that cheerful little sound her father had always loved, and Emily glanced up. Her stomach tightened instantly. A mountain of a man dressed in worn leather pushed through the doorway. His weathered face was half hidden behind a wild gray beard that looked like it had seen dust from 1,000 highways. Faded tattoos crawled up his thick forearms like illustrated stories of a hard life disappearing beneath rolled-up sleeves. But it was the patch on his vest that made the room go still. The unmistakable death's head insignia of the Hells Angels. The handful of remaining customers froze. Old Mrs. Whitmore actually clutched her pearls. The Dawson brothers stopped mid-bite, forks hovering in the air. Even the radio seemed to hit a moment of static. The biker seemed to feel the tension, his massive shoulders hunching slightly as he made his way to the counter. Each heavy bootfall echoed against the worn linoleum like a hammer strike. He deliberately chose the stool at the far end, keeping distance between himself and the other patrons, a man used to being unwelcome. Emily could practically hear her father's voice in her head. Everyone's money spends the same at Parker's. But her father had never had to serve a Hell's Angel in their small, conservative town, where rumors about the motorcycle club circulated like gospel. Emily steadied her hand, grabbed a cloudy plastic menu and a glass of ice water. The other waitress, Rachel, had suddenly found a pressing need to refill ketchup bottles at the far end of the diner. "Thanks for coming into Parker's," Emily said, approaching him with the same practiced smile she offered every customer. "Today's special is meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Made it fresh this morning." The biker looked up, and Emily was struck by his eyes, pale blue and bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. Against that hard face, those leather-creased features, his eyes seemed to belong to another man entirely. "Coffee," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, almost soft. "Black as you can make it, and whatever's fastest from the kitchen. Been on the road since before sunup." As Emily poured his coffee from the ancient percolator, she noticed his hands, huge, callous things that seemed built for violence, but there was a slight tremble to them as he reached for the mug. His knuckles were scraped raw, and a thin hospital bracelet was partially hidden beneath his leather cuff. Behind the exhaustion in his eyes, Emily recognized something else, A bone-deep sadness she'd seen too many times during her nursing rotations in the oncology ward. It was the look of someone keeping vigil. "Long ride ahead of you still?" she asked, keeping her voice casual, the way her father had always chatted with strangers. His massive hands wrapped around the coffee mug like it was something precious, drawing warmth from the chipped ceramic. He took a long pull before answering. "Heading back to Riverbend Hospital," he said finally, each word deliberate, like speaking was an effort. "My daughter." Something seemed to catch in his throat. He stared down at his coffee, his knuckles whitening around the mug. "My daughter," he repeated, but couldn't seem to finish the thought. Emily felt something shift inside her. Not pity. This man wouldn't want pity, but a familiar ache of recognition. Not a Hell's Angel in that moment, just a worried father. "I'll get that order in right away," she said, her voice softening. "Toast and eggs work?" "Fastest thing on the menu. 6 minutes tops." He nodded, the relief evident as his shoulders relaxed slightly. Maybe it was the promise of food, or maybe just that she hadn't asked him to explain further. As Emily turned to place the order, she felt the stares from the remaining customers. Mrs. Whitmore was whispering urgently to Mrs. Green, their gray heads bent together like conspirators. The Dawson brothers were openly glaring. Rachel was still finding those ketchup bottles absolutely fascinating. Small towns had long memories, and the Hells Angels had a reputation that preceded them. 20 years ago, a group of bikers had roared through Brookfield, leaving broken windows at Marshall's grocery after an argument. Never mind that no one knew if they'd been Angels or some other club. In Brookfield's collective memory, all bikers were guilty by association. The bell jingled again, and two of Brookfield's police officers walked in. Officer Daniels and Officer Brooks. They were regulars, usually friendly enough, though Emily had always found Daniels' swagger a bit much. They spotted the biker immediately, and Emily saw Daniels nudge Brooks. They approached the counter, deliberately taking seats on either side of the man. "Well, well. Don't often see your kind in Brookfield," Daniels said loudly, making no attempt to hide his hostility. "Just passing through, I hope." The biker kept his eyes on his coffee. "Just getting some food, officer." Emily returned with a plate of eggs and toast, placing it in front of the biker. "Anything else I can get you?" Before he could answer, Officer Daniels spoke up. "How about checking this guy's ID, Emily? Make sure he's not one of those Angels we've got bulletins about." The biker reached slowly into his pocket, but Daniels' hand moved to his holster. "Careful now." Emily felt her temper rising. "He's a paying customer, Daniels. Just like you." "Not just like me," Daniels smirked. "His kind bring trouble. Drugs. Violence." "My kind?" The biker looked up for the first time, his voice still quiet but with an edge. "You don't know the first thing about me, officer." Daniels leaned in closer. "I know that patch. I know what it means." The biker started to respond, but Brooks cut him off. "Maybe we should run your plates. See what comes up." Several other customers were watching now, some nodding in agreement with the officers, others looking uncomfortable. The biker put his fork down. "Look, I'm just trying to get some food before I visit my daughter at Riverbend. She's—" His voice caught slightly. "She's not doing well." "Oh, I'm sure." Daniels laughed. "The old sick family member. Classic." Something in Emily snapped. Maybe it was the memory of her father in his hospital bed, or maybe it was just the basic human decency her parents had taught her. Either way, she'd had enough. That's it, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. You're done harassing my customers, Daniels. The diner went silent. No one spoke to Officer Daniels that way, especially not about how he handled suspicious individuals. Excuse me? Daniels turned his attention to Emily, eyes narrowing. You heard me. He came in for a meal. He's been nothing but polite, and you're treating him like a criminal. You don't know who you're defending, Emily, Brooks warned. I'm defending a customer in my diner, and unless you have an actual reason to suspect him of something besides his clothing, I'd appreciate it if you let him eat in peace. Daniel stood up, towering over Emily. Your dad would be real disappointed to see you taking sides against the law. That was a low blow, and everyone knew it. Frank Parker had been friends with half the police force before his stroke. My dad taught me to judge people by how they act, not what they wear, Emily replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. And right now, you're the one acting badly in my diner. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Several customers shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Green, the retired librarian, suddenly became very interested in her pie. Brian Dawson, who'd gone to high school with Emily, stared down at his coffee cup. I think I'll take my food to go, the biker said quietly, reaching for his wallet. No, Emily said firmly. Your money's no good here today. The meal's on me. The biker looked at her with surprise, genuine gratitude flashing across his face. Daniels's face flushed deep red. You're making a mistake, Emily. This town has a way of remembering who its friends are. The threat wasn't subtle. In a small town like Brookfield, being on the wrong side of the police could be bad for business. Emily's hands were trembling now, but she kept her chin up. Are you going to order something, or are you just here to intimidate my customers? For a moment, she thought Daniels might do something truly stupid. Instead, he threw a few dollars on the counter. Lost my appetite. Let's go, Brooks. As they left, the bell jingling angrily behind them, conversation slowly resumed throughout the diner. Emily turned to the biker, who was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I'm sorry about that, she said. He shook his head slowly. Don't be. Not many people would have done what you just did. He paused, studying her face. Name's Jason. Jason Mercer. Emily Parker. Thank you, Emily Parker. He ate quickly after that, and when he finished, he left a $20 bill on the counter despite her protests. For your dad, he said simply before heading out the door. Emily tried to put the incident behind her, but the stares from the other customers told her it wouldn't be that simple. By closing time, she'd overheard enough whispered conversations to know the story was spreading through town like wildfire. That night, as she sat by her father's bedside at the Brookfield Care Center, she told him about her day. I don't know if I did the right thing, Dad, she said, even though his stroke had left him unable to respond. But I couldn't just stand by. Her father's eyes seemed to hold approval, but maybe that was just what she wanted to see. The next morning, Emily arrived at the diner early as usual. What wasn't usual was the closed until further notice sign someone had taped to her window overnight. Beneath it, scrawled in red marker, no biker lovers in Brookfield. Emily ripped the sign down, her hands shaking with anger. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed, but the message was clear enough. The breakfast rush was noticeably lighter than normal. By lunchtime, it was obvious that word had spread. The diner that usually buzzed with conversation and clinking silverware was eerily quiet, with only a handful of regulars, braving the apparent boycott. Old Mrs. Green came in for her usual tuna sandwich, patting Emily's hand sympathetically. "This will blow over, dear. Small towns have short memories when they want to." Brian Dawson and his wife came by too, deliberately sitting at the window table where they could be seen from the street. "To hell with them," Brian said louder than necessary. "Best coffee in town is still the best coffee in town." But these small gestures of support weren't enough. Emily did the math in her head. Another week like this, and she wouldn't make rent. Around 2 o'clock, with the diner empty, Emily allowed herself a rare moment of despair. She leaned against the counter, fighting back tears. The diner wasn't just a business, it was her father's legacy, the place where she'd grown up, learning to count change and wipe tables. Now it might all disappear because she'd stood up for a stranger. The familiar jingle of the bell interrupted her thoughts. Emily quickly wiped her eyes, putting on her professional smile. A man in his 50s stood in the doorway, dressed in jeans and a plain blue t-shirt. The only hint of his affiliation was a small Hells Angels pin on his leather jacket. Behind him was a woman about the same age, her long gray hair pulled back in a neat braid. "Emily Parker?" the man asked. Emily nodded, suddenly nervous. "I'm Thomas Mercer, Jason's brother." He stepped forward, extending his hand. "This is my wife, Sandra." Emily shook their hands, confusion evident on her face. "Jason told us what you did for him yesterday," Sandra explained. "He would have come himself, but he's still at the hospital with Chloe. That's his daughter." "How is she?" Emily asked. "Touch and go," Thomas replied, his face grim. "Cancer, stage 4. They're trying an experimental treatment at Riverbend. Last chance kind of thing." Emily's heart sank. "I'm so sorry." "Jason said you were kind to him when not many would be," Sandra continued. "Said you stood up to those cops like you'd been doing it all your life." Emily shrugged, embarrassed. Anyone would have done the same. Thomas shook his head. "No, they wouldn't. And from the looks of this place, you're paying for it now." Emily couldn't deny it. The empty tables spoke for themselves. "We wanted to thank you properly," Sandra said, reaching into her purse. "Jason said you mentioned your father was ill." "I don't need money," Emily said quickly, her pride flaring. Thomas held up his hands. "Wouldn't dream of offering. But we thought maybe we could send some business your way." Before Emily could ask what he meant, the rumble of motorcycle engines filled the air. Not just one or two, but dozens, growing louder by the second. Emily moved to the window, her eyes widening as motorcycle after motorcycle appeared on the street outside her diner. They came from both directions, filling the street, then the parking lot, then spilling over into the vacant lot next door. There had to be at least 100, no, 200 bikers, men and women of all ages, most wearing Hells Angels colors or supportive patches. They dismounted in waves, removing helmets, stretching after what must have been a long ride. "What? What is this?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible above the rumble of idling engines. Thomas smiled. "Jason reached out to some of the local chapters last night, told them about a diner owner who showed him respect when he needed it most. Word travels fast in our community." "There must be over 200 people out there," Emily whispered. 217 by my last count," Sandra corrected with a smile. "And they've all been riding since dawn. I imagine they're pretty hungry." As if on cue, the bell jingled and the first group of bikers entered. They were polite, almost deferential, greeting Emily with respect before taking seats. Then more came in, filling every table, lining up at the counter, standing patiently when there was nowhere left to sit. Emily stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed. A large man with a full white beard approached her. "You must be Emily. I'm Marcus, president of the Riverbend chapter. Jason's one of ours." He extended a massive hand, which Emily shook automatically. "Hope you don't mind us dropping in like this." I don't think I have enough food," Emily admitted. Marcus laughed. "Already taken care of. Sandra called ahead to your suppliers. Got a big delivery coming in 20 minutes. Don't worry about the cost. It's covered." Emily looked around in disbelief as her diner, which had been a ghost town moments before, now buzzed with life. The bikers were ordering coffee, water, whatever she had ready. All paying in cash, all leaving generous tips. "I don't understand," she said to Marcus. "You did all this for me?" "Because of what happened with Jason?" Marcus's expression grew serious. "People see our patches and think they know who we are. Most times, they treat us like we're not even human. Jason was on his way to maybe say goodbye to his daughter, and those cops were giving him grief just because of what he was wearing." He paused, looking around the diner. "What you did, standing up for one of our brothers when it wasn't the easy thing to do, that means something to us." Outside, the rumble of motorcycles continued as more riders arrived. Across the street, Emily could see people gathering on the sidewalk, watching in amazement. She even spotted Officer Brooks among them, radio in hand, looking utterly bewildered. The bell, above the door, jingled again, and Emily turned to see a familiar face. Jason Mercer stood in the doorway, looking tired, but somehow lighter than he had the day before. "Hope you don't mind me bringing a few friends," he said with the ghost of a smile. Emily laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. "I think I can squeeze them in." For the next few hours, Emily and the 2 teenage waitresses she managed to call in worked harder than they ever had. The food delivery arrived as promised. Boxes of fresh produce, meat, bread, and everything else they needed. It was enough to feed an army of hungry bikers. Every table was full. Customers rotated out as new arrivals stepped in. The register filled and had to be emptied twice. The bikers were courteous, appreciative, and every one of them paid in cash and tipped generously. Word spread through town, and slowly, cautiously, some of the regular customers began to reappear. They stood awkwardly at first, clearly intimidated by the sea of leather and tattoos, but the bikers made room, shared tables, and struck up conversations. Mrs. Green ended up deep in conversation with a biker grandmother about their shared love of quilting. Brian Dawson discovered one of the riders was also a Vietnam veteran. Even the high school principal found himself in a debate about education reform with a biker who turned out to be a part-time community college professor. By sunset, the impromptu gathering had transformed into something like a street festival. Someone rolled out a portable grill to help with the overflow cooking. Music played from motorcycle stereos. Children from the neighborhood cautiously approached, fascinated by the gleaming bikes. Laughter and conversation filled the air. In the middle of it all, Emily found a moment to pull Jason aside. "How's your daughter?" "Chloe, right?" Jason's face brightened for the first time. "That's actually why I could make it today. Doctor called this morning. The treatment, it's working. Early days, but her numbers are better." His voice caught. "First good news we've had in months." Emily hugged him, and after a beat of surprise, he hugged her back. "She wants to meet you," Jason said when they pulled apart. The woman who stood up for her old man. I told her you reminded me of her. Tough. Doesn't take any nonsense. I'd like that, Emily said, meaning it. As the evening wound down, Marcus called for everyone's attention. Conversations paused. Forks stopped midair. I want to thank Emily Parker for her hospitality today, he announced, his deep voice carrying easily across the diner. And I want to make something clear to everyone in Brookfield. He paused, looking around. Parker's Diner is under the protection of the Hells Angels from this day forward. A cheer erupted from the bikers. Marcus continued, We'll be making this a regular stop on our rides, and we'd take it as a personal insult if anyone in this town gave Miss Parker any trouble about who she chooses to serve in her establishment. He locked eyes with Officer Brooks, who had finally ventured inside and now sat uncomfortably in a corner booth. Brooks looked down at his hands. Are we clear? Marcus asked. Brooks nodded quickly. Yes. Good, Marcus said, his expression warming. Now who's ready for pie? I hear Emily's apple pie is the best in 3 counties. Another round of cheers, and conversation resumed. Laughter and the smell of warm pastry filled the air. Later that night, after the last of the bikers had departed with promises to return soon, Emily locked up the diner and sat down to count the receipts. It was more money than she'd made in the past 2 weeks combined. But more than that, something had changed. Not just in her diner, but in the town itself. She could feel it in the air as she walked to her car. The town that had been ready to shut her out that very morning had seen something new that day. Behind the leather vests and loud engines, they'd glimpsed the humanity of people they'd been taught to fear. As Emily drove to the care center to visit her father, she smiled at the irony. By standing up for one stranger, she'd gained hundreds of friends. And maybe, just maybe, helped a small town remember what it means to judge people by how they act, not by how they look. The next morning, Emily arrived at the diner to find a package leaning against the door. Inside was a leather vest, custom-made, with Parker's Diner emblazoned across the back and surrounded by the words, Friends of the Angels. Pinned to it was a note, written in rough handwriting. For the bravest diner owner we know, Chloe's doing better. She still wants to meet you. Jason Emily hung the vest behind the counter, right next to her father's old apron. When Officer Daniels came in for coffee an hour later, unusually subdued and polite, Emily served him with the same smile she gave every customer. After all, her father had always taught her to judge people by how they act, not what they wear. And sometimes, it takes a diner full of bikers to remind a town what that really means. It's a strange thing, how the smallest moments can change our lives. Emily Parker didn't set out to be a hero that day. She just couldn't stand by while someone was being mistreated. She didn't know that her simple act of decency would bring 200 bikers to her door, save her father's legacy, and help heal the divisions in a wounded town. Sometimes, courage isn't about grand gestures or dramatic stands. Sometimes, it's just about serving coffee to a stranger when everyone else turns away, and changing the world one cup at a time.
Samuel Harris never expected that the quiet isolation of his old farmhouse would be broken by a frantic knock during a violent storm. But that evening, as thunder roared across the sky and rain battered the windows like tiny fists, that knock came. He had just set down a modest dinner of reheated stew and a slice of bread, the same meal he had prepared for himself most nights since his wife Eleanor had passed 3 years prior. At 62, Samuel was used to the stillness, the absence of another voice in the house. The silence had become a companion, broken only by the occasional groan of aging wood or the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. The knock came again, louder, more urgent. Samuel rose, sighed heavily, and walked to the door. As he moved across the room, the floorboards creaked under his steps. He grabbed the flashlight from the side table by the entryway. When he opened the door, the beam caught a figure standing on the porch, drenched and trembling. She looked barely older than 25. Her soaked hair clung to her face, and her clothes were plastered to her skin. But it was her belly that drew his attention. Round and unmistakably full. She was at least 8 months pregnant. "Please," she said, her voice thin against the howl of wind. "My car broke down, about half a mile back. I did not know where else to go." Samuel hesitated for only a moment. "Come inside," he said, stepping back. "You will catch your death out there." She stumbled into the hallway, leaving a pool of water on the worn welcome mat. Up close, he could see how exhausted she looked. Her eyes were heavy, and her face pale. "I'm Emily Dawson," she said, her teeth chattering. "I'm so sorry to intrude." "Samuel Harris," he replied. "Let's get you out of those wet clothes first. You can explain later." He led her into the living room where the fire in the hearth still glowed. The room looked almost untouched since Eleanor's passing. Same faded couch, same patterned afghan draped over the rocking chair, same family photographs on the mantel. "Wait here," Samuel said. "I'll find you something dry." He returned moments later with a flannel shirt and drawstring sweatpants. "These were my wife's," he said, a little gruff. "Should fit over things." He gestured toward her belly. "Thank you," Emily murmured, clutching the clothes with chilled fingers. "Is there a place I can change?" Samuel pointed to the downstairs bathroom. As she stepped away, he returned to the kitchen and poured a cup of hot tea. When she came back, the clothes hung loose around her frame, except where they stretched across her stomach. But she looked a bit warmer and a bit less shaken. "The storm's not easing up," Samuel said as he handed her the steaming mug. "Phones are probably down too." Emily nodded as she wrapped her hands around the cup. "I was heading to my aunt's house in Fairbrook. The GPS sent me down this road, and then my car died. Smoke started coming from under the hood." Her voice wavered. "I did not think I would find anyone out here." "Been here all my life," Samuel said. "This land has been in my family since before my grandfather's time." Emily took a sip of the tea and then grimaced, her hand moving to her side. "You all right?" Samuel asked, a note of concern entering his voice. "Just a contraction," she said, trying to smile. "They've been coming and going all day, still pretty spaced out." Samuel rubbed his hand over his face. A storm, a stranger, a pregnant woman in labor. This was not how he expected his quiet night to go. "How far along are you?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. 9 months, she replied. "Due any day now." A particularly fierce gust rattled the windows. The lights flickered, and then went out entirely. "Perfect," Samuel muttered. In the flickering shadows cast by the fire, he moved to light candles from the stash he kept for emergencies. As he struck the first match, he caught a clear look at Emily. Her face, her posture, something about her. It stirred something deep in his memory, something he could not name. He told himself it was just her resemblance to Eleanor in her youth. But as the night wore on, Samuel would discover just how deeply connected they truly were, and how this storm was nothing compared to the one about to arrive within those 4 walls. With the candles lit and placed around the room, Samuel finally took a seat across from Emily. Her hair, now drying in loose waves, framed a face that looked both weary and strong. There was a calmness about her despite the exhaustion, a quiet determination that reminded him even more of Eleanor. The baby's father, Samuel found himself asking, though he instantly regretted the intrusion. "Is he not in the picture?" Emily answered quickly. "It is just me." Samuel gave a small nod. He knew better than to pry further. People have their reasons, he said simply, and sometimes that is all right. You should eat something, he added after a moment, motioning toward the kitchen. There is stew on the table. It is nothing fancy, but it is hot. They sat together in the flickering glow of the candles, the storm still raging outside. Rain lashed at the windows and wind groaned against the walls, but inside there was warmth. Samuel watched Emily as she ate, slow and deliberate. Even in clothes too big for her, with the shadows under her eyes, she carried herself with quiet dignity. Tell me about your aunt, he said gently, trying to distract both of them from the storm. The one in Fairbrook. For a second, something flickered in Emily's eyes. Truth is, I have never met her, she admitted. My mother spoke of her before she passed last year, said if I ever needed help, I should try to find her. And you need help now? Samuel asked. Emily looked down at her belly, her fingers gently resting over it. More than ever. Another contraction hit, and this time it seemed longer. She closed her eyes and breathed through it, wincing. Samuel checked his watch. That was 20 minutes since the last one. Closer now. What is your aunt's name? He asked, trying to shift her focus. Eleanor, Emily said, her breath evening out. Eleanor Harris. That was her maiden name, I think. I do not know if she ever married. The spoon Samuel had been holding dropped to the table with a loud clatter. What did you say? He asked, his voice low. Emily looked up, startled. Eleanor Harris, she repeated. Is something wrong? Samuel felt the world tilt. Eleanor Harris was my wife. Emily stared at him, her wide eyes reflecting the candlelight. You are Samuel? He nodded slowly, mind racing. Eleanor never had siblings. She was an only child. Emily leaned forward, urgency creeping into her voice. She had a sister. My mother. Her name was Caroline Dawson, born Caroline Harris. My mother never stopped talking about her sister, but she said they had a falling out a long time ago. Samuel shook his head in disbelief. We were married 40 years. She would have told me if she had a sister. Emily's hand moved to her chest, and for the first time, Samuel noticed the silver locket around her neck. It was old, tarnished with time, but the design, a delicate heart with a small engraved flower, was unmistakable. Samuel's voice caught in his throat. He had seen that locket before, identical, in fact, to the one he had given Eleanor for their 20th anniversary. The very one she was buried with. Where did you get that? He asked, barely above a whisper. Emily looked down and touched the locket. It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died. With careful fingers, she opened the clasp. Inside was a faded photograph. 2 young women, arms wrapped around each other, laughing at the camera. One of them was undoubtedly a younger Eleanor. The other had the same eyes as Emily. That is my mother, Emily said softly. Samuel sat back, the breath leaving his lungs in a rush. He could not find the words. It was as if he were seeing a ghost, not only of Eleanor, but of a life she had never spoken of. She never told you, did she? Emily asked gently. Before he could respond, a brilliant flash of lightning lit up the room, followed by a crash of thunder that rattled the windows. Emily gasped, her hands gripping her belly tightly. That one was stronger, she said, grimacing. Samuel shook off the shock and focused. He knew that expression. He had seen it twice before, when Eleanor had brought their own children into the world. How close now? He asked, his voice firm again. Emily's breathing was shallow. Maybe 15 minutes. The storm outside howled louder. The power was still out. Phones dead. The nearest hospital more than 30 miles away, and no way to get there. I delivered both our children, Samuel said, standing. And more calves than I care to count. If it comes to that... Emily met his eyes. There was fear, yes, but beneath it was trust. "I believe you." Those simple words struck Samuel with more force than the thunder outside. How could she believe in him so easily? And yet, if she was Eleanor's niece, then she was family. "Try to rest between contractions," he advised. "I will gather what we might need." As he moved through the dark house collecting towels, scissors, and thread, questions swirled in his mind. Why had Eleanor never mentioned her sister? What had driven them apart so completely? And most importantly, had Emily really stumbled here by chance? Or had she been looking for him all along? By the time Samuel returned to the living room, Emily was pacing slowly in front of the fire. One hand supported her lower back, and her other arm occasionally rested protectively over her belly. As he stepped into the room, the firelight caught her profile just right, and his breath caught in his throat. The resemblance to Eleanor was more than passing. It was undeniable. "Your contractions?" he asked, setting the supplies on the coffee table. "How often now?" "About 12 minutes, she replied, pausing mid-step. "But I think my water just broke." Samuel nodded. There would be no hospital tonight. This baby would be born here, in this house that had seen generations come into the world. "Tell me about my aunt," Emily said suddenly, as if sensing his thoughts. "What was she like?" Samuel settled into his old armchair, the one Eleanor had always insisted stayed by the fire. "Eleanor was steady," he said. "She could weather any storm and still have a smile left for you at the end." He paused, swallowing thickly. "She loved this land. She loved our children. She never once complained. Not about the hard years, not about the lean ones." "My mother was different," Emily said softly. "Always restless. Always chasing something just beyond her reach." Another contraction hit, and Emily braced herself against the back of the couch, her knuckles white with strain. Samuel checked his watch. 10 minutes now, he said. "What happened between them?" he asked when Emily could speak again. "Why didn't Eleanor ever tell me about her?" Emily shook her head slowly. "My mother never said exactly. Just that they argued when they were young. Words were spoken, words that could not be taken back." Her eyes lifted to meet his. She regretted it, especially toward the end. "She made me promise I would find her sister. To make it right." "Eleanor passed 3 years ago," Samuel said gently. "A heart attack. It was quick, at least." Emily's face crumpled with emotion. "Then I am too late." "Maybe not entirely," Samuel said. "She left me behind. 2 children, though they are grown and far away now. And grandchildren. Which makes them your cousins, I suppose." Thunder rolled overhead again, louder now, and the windows rattled in their frames. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, something had shifted. The tension between them had been replaced with a quiet understanding. The next few hours blurred into a steady rhythm of preparation and pain. Samuel moved the furniture, laid out clean sheets, and added more wood to the fire. Emily's contractions grew stronger and more frequent. They spoke quietly between the pain. About Eleanor, about Caroline, about all the missed years and unspoken words. "I was going to name the baby Eleanor if it is a girl," Emily said during one of the breaks. "After the aunt I never met." Samuel felt something inside him break open. It was a part of him he had sealed away after Eleanor died. "She would have liked that," he said. As midnight approached, the storm reached its peak. Rain lashed the windows, and the wind seemed determined to lift the roof from the house. But inside, a different kind of storm took hold. "It is time," Emily gasped, her voice tight with effort. "The baby is coming now?" Samuel nodded, rolling up his sleeves. He had helped deliver calves, foals, and had stood beside Eleanor for the birth of their own children. But that had been decades ago, and this time there was no Eleanor. Just him and Emily, and the memory of a woman they had both loved in different ways. "You can do this," he told her. "Just listen to your body." Push when it tells you to. Emily nodded once, her focus fully on the pain and the moment. She gripped the sheets beneath her tightly, sweat beading on her forehead. Her breathing was sharp, shallow, controlled. What followed seemed both endless and over in a heartbeat. Emily's cries rose and fell with the wind outside. Samuel worked with a calm urgency, his hands steady, his mind clear. And then, in the silence between thunderclaps, a new sound filled the room. The thin, indignant wail of a newborn. "It is a girl," Samuel said, his voice thick as he wrapped the baby in a towel. "A beautiful baby girl." He placed her gently in Emily's arms, and in that instant, he saw it again, the look on her face. The same expression Eleanor had worn when she held their firstborn. Wonder, love, peace. "Margaret," Emily whispered, stroking the baby's cheek. Little Margaret. Outside, as if on cue, the storm began to recede. The wind quieted, the rain softened to a gentle patter. And inside, where grief had once filled every shadow, there was now the steady, quiet breathing of new life. By the time Samuel had cleared up and helped Emily into the guest bedroom to rest, the rain had settled into a soft, rhythmic patter against the roof. He placed a battery-powered lantern on the nightstand, then settled into the rocking chair beside the bed. Emily was already drifting into sleep, little Margaret tucked peacefully on her chest. In the soft light, Samuel could see it clearly now. The shape of Eleanor's jaw, the set of her mouth, the quiet strength in the curve of Emily's posture. The resemblance was unmistakable, now that he knew to look for it. How had he not seen it from the beginning? When dawn came, Samuel stepped onto the porch and surveyed the property. The storm had taken down several limbs from the old oak at the edge of the fields, and the driveway was dotted with puddles large enough to reflect the sky. But the house had held firm. It had stood against countless storms. This one had passed like the rest. When he returned inside, Emily was awake. She looked tired but peaceful as she fed Margaret with slow, steady care. "The phone lines should be working again soon," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "We should get you both checked by a doctor. Make sure everything is all right." Emily nodded, but hesitated. "Samuel, there is something else I need to tell you." He waited, heart tightening. "I did not just come here looking for Eleanor," she said. "I came looking for you." "Me?" Samuel frowned. "How did you even know about me?" Emily's fingers went to the locket she still wore. "My mother kept track of Eleanor from a distance. She knew about you, about your children. She never reached out, too proud, I think. But she never stopped caring. And you? Why now?" Emily looked down at the baby, then back at him. "Because I have nothing left. My mother is gone. The baby's father left when I told him I was pregnant. I lost my job, my home. This locket was the only thing of value I had. I could not bring myself to sell it." Samuel felt a familiar ache rising in his chest. The same one that had followed Eleanor's death. The same one that came when his children left the farm. A deep, hollow quiet that had made the house echo with absence. "You are not alone now," he said. "Not if you do not want to be." Emily's eyes welled with tears. "But you barely know me." "I knew Eleanor," Samuel replied, "and I see her in you. That is enough. You have a place here, if you want it, both of you." Sunlight pierced through the thinning clouds, casting warm golden beams across the hardwood floors. The storm had passed, and the house was full of breath and light again. Not as it had been before. Not a restoration, but a beginning. 6 months later, Samuel stood on the same porch, watching Emily hang fresh laundry on the line. Little Margaret lay nearby on a blanket, gurgling beneath the shade of a tree. She had grown fast. Her eyes Eleanor's blue, her hair Emily's dark waves. They had made a life here. Emily took care of the house and helped Samuel around the farm, which he had begun working again with surprising vigor. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch, trading stories about Eleanor and Caroline, trying to piece together the past while building something new. Samuel had reached out to his children, told them the strange story of how Emily and Margaret had come to the farm. They were skeptical at first, but one look at the locket, and one look at the child who bore Eleanor's eyes, and they came. Last month, they had all gathered for the first time in years. The house had echoed with laughter and children's footsteps. For the first time in a long time, it had felt like home again. As Emily lifted the final sheet onto the line, she glanced back and saw Samuel watching. She smiled, a small, quiet smile that had grown more confident each day. She was putting down roots, in the same soil that had held generations before her. "A penny for your thoughts," she called. Samuel shook his head and smiled, just thinking how Eleanor would have liked this, seeing family together again. Emily touched the locket. "I think she does see it," she said softly, "and I think she is happy." Margaret began to fuss, and Samuel stepped down from the porch to join them. The emptiness that had lingered in his heart for 3 years had not been replaced, but it had been answered. Not with noise, but with life. Not with memory, but with continuation. Sometimes, the fiercest storms carry the greatest gifts. And sometimes, the family we find can be just as precious as the family we are born into.
Daniel Sullivan was arrested for helping a homeless woman during the worst heat wave in decades. That one simple act of kindness, it destroyed his reputation and nearly took down his family's diner. But then, just past midnight, his phone rang. Bulldozers and floodlights were surrounding his apartment building. And someone powerful was asking for him by name. "Hi, everyone. Welcome to Not Just the Stories. Let's dive in." Daniel's father had built Sullivan's Diner with his own 2 hands back in 1978. A fact Daniel proudly told nearly every customer who ever walked through the door. The place wasn't much to look at anymore. Vinyl booths cracked from decades of wear, ceiling fans that barely spun in the suffocating summer heat, and a flickering neon sign where the L in Sullivan's threatened to give out at any moment, just like the business itself. 3 years ago, when his father passed away from heart failure, after a lifetime of serving greasy comfort food to the folks of Milltown, Daniel had left behind his teaching career in Chicago and come home. There were no savings, no investments, just the diner, and a mountain of medical debt that now rested squarely on Daniel's shoulders. His dad had always called the diner his legacy, his gift to the community, some gift. What his father hadn't told him was that the community had mostly abandoned downtown Milltown in favor of shiny chain restaurants off the interstate. Still, Daniel kept the grill hot and the coffee fresh. A small circle of loyal customers, mostly retirees who remembered his father, kept showing up. It wasn't enough to turn a profit, but it was just enough to keep the doors open. Barely. Daniel first noticed the woman in early June, as the heat wave began choking the Midwest. She sat alone on a bench across the street from the diner, beside a battered shopping cart filled with her belongings. Most homeless people in Milltown drifted between shelters, the library, or anywhere with air conditioning during the day. But she stayed put, hour after hour in the brutal sun, like she was standing guard over something invisible. She looked to be in her 60s, with tightly pulled back silver hair that somehow remained neat despite her rough situation. Her clothes, though obviously worn, were clean. Her posture was alert. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, seemed completely out of place for someone living on the street. On the 3rd day of seeing her melt in the relentless sun, Daniel finally crossed the street with a large cup of ice water. She looked up, a little startled but composed. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said, offering the cup. Her hands, he noticed, were clean, fingernails trimmed short and neat. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady, polished, like a librarian or maybe an old teacher. "I'm Daniel. I run the diner over there." "Evelyn," she said simply and took a long drink. That was all they said that first day. But as the heat climbed past 100 degrees and stayed there, Daniel kept checking on Evelyn. A cup of water became a sandwich. A sandwich turned into an invitation to sit in the diner's back storeroom during the worst of the heat. Evelyn rarely talked about herself. She deflected personal questions with practiced grace, but she listened. And when Daniel spoke about his struggles with the diner, she offered business advice, practical, insightful, and sharp. Sometimes she read the newspaper he brought her, commenting on world events with surprising knowledge and context. Daniel became certain Evelyn hadn't always lived like this. The only item she guarded closely was an old, leather-bound notebook wrapped in plastic, always tucked under her shirt. Once, when he asked about it, she'd simply said, "Some memories are worth holding on to, even when you've let go of everything else." For 3 weeks, they kept this quiet routine. But then, Milltown's new mayor announced a downtown beautification initiative, a thinly veiled campaign to remove the homeless from the commercial district. Police patrols increased. Business owners were pressured to report loiterers. Daniel ignored it. He kept helping Evelyn. But others had noticed, particularly Gregory Nash, the owner of the upscale boutique next to the diner and president of the local business association. Nash had been trying to buy Daniel's building for years, claiming the eyesore diner was dragging down the block. On a blazing Tuesday afternoon, 104 degrees, Daniel was bringing Evelyn a sandwich and frozen water when Officer Brooks pulled up in his cruiser. "Afternoon, Mr. Sullivan," Brooks said, stepping out. He was new, young, ambitious, the kind of rookie that chased stats more than sense. "What have you got there?" "Just some lunch," Daniel said, continuing toward Evelyn. "Mind if I take a look?" Brooks asked, though it wasn't really a question. He stepped into Daniel's path. "It's a sandwich," Daniel said, growing annoyed. "Turkey on wheat. Want to search it for contraband?" "Actually, I do." Brooks reached for the bag. "We've had reports of drug activity in the area." Daniel pulled back. "That's ridiculous. I'm feeding someone. It's 100 degrees out." A small crowd was starting to gather, and Gregory Nash stood in his boutique doorway, watching smugly. "Sir, hand over the bag," Brooks said, one hand resting near his holster. "This is harassment," Daniel muttered, but handed it over. Brooks inspected the sandwich like it was evidence, then grabbed the water bottle. "And what's in here?" "It's water," Daniel snapped. "Want to test it for vodka?" "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down." Brooks opened the bottle and sniffed it dramatically. "We've been getting complaints about you regularly meeting with this individual." He gestured at Evelyn. "Possible drug handoffs." "That's insane," Daniel said. "I run a diner. I'm giving food to someone in need." "Then you won't mind if I check your pockets." "Actually, I do mind." That sounds like something someone guilty might say. What happened next moved fast. Daniel tried to step past Brooks to get to Evelyn, who now looked pale, swaying in the heat. Brooks grabbed Daniel's arm. Daniel instinctively pulled back. And suddenly, he was face down on the hot sidewalk, arms wrenched behind his back. "You are under arrest for resisting an officer and suspected narcotics distribution," Brooks declared loudly. "This is insane," Daniel shouted as the cuffs bit into his wrists. "Ask anyone. I've been giving her food because it's 104 degrees." But Evelyn was gone. In the chaos, she and her cart had vanished. As the police cruiser door slammed, Daniel caught one last glimpse. Gregory Nash, smiling smugly from the sidewalk. The holding cell reeked of bleach and despair. Daniel sat hunched on a cold metal bench, head in his hands. After 6 long hours, fingerprinting, and a humiliating strip search, they finally let him make a phone call. He called the only lawyer he knew, his old high school friend, Ben Carter, who usually handled wills and real estate. "They've got nothing, Daniel," Ben said, flipping through the arrest report. "No drugs, no evidence. It's your word against a rookie cop. Then why am I still here?" "Because this is Milltown, and Gregory Nash plays golf with Judge Thornton." Ben sighed. "Look, they can't hold you longer than 24 hours without charging you. You'll be out by tomorrow afternoon at the latest." "The diner," Daniel said suddenly. "I called Julia. She's covering the lunch rush." "But Ben," Ben paused. "Yeah, word's already spreading. In a small town like Milltown, even a false arrest was enough to destroy a man's name." And the diner? It was already hanging by a thread. By the time Daniel was released the next morning, no charges, just a stern warning. The damage had already been done. The local paper had run a short story. "Downtown diner owner arrested in suspected drug incident." Carefully worded. Not technically slander, but devastating all the same. When Daniel arrived at the diner, only 2 tables were occupied, both by men who'd known his father for years. "Your dad vouched for you for 3 decades, one of them, old Joe, said. That's good enough for me." But 2 loyal customers wouldn't keep the lights on. By closing time, Daniel had served less than 25% of his usual business. As he locked up, he noticed a new "For Lease" sign in the vacant store next door, another empty space on a dying street. Daniel's apartment was above an old hardware store 3 blocks from the diner. Small, outdated but cheap. And the landlord, Mr. Dalton, had been friends with Daniel's father. As Daniel climbed the stairs that evening, the weight of failure pressed on him heavier than the heat. He stopped by Evelyn's usual bench, calling her name. No answer, no cart, no sign. He hoped, prayed, she'd found shelter. The fact that he'd been arrested for helping her, and now couldn't even find her, felt like the cruelest twist. Back inside, he took a lukewarm shower and had a dinner of stale crackers. It was all he had the energy or money for. He collapsed on his bed without setting an alarm. What was the point? At this rate, the diner would be gone before the month was out. Sleep came in restless fragments, visions of empty booths, unpaid bills, Evelyn's empty bench. Then, almost exactly at midnight, Daniel's phone rang. The screen lit up with Mr. Dalton's number. "Hello?" Daniel mumbled, barely awake. "Daniel? It's Howard Dalton." The man's voice was tight, tense. You might want to look out your window." "What? Why?" I don't know how to explain this. There's construction equipment outside, big stuff, floodlights, bulldozers, and a guy in a suit asking for you by name. Construction? At midnight?" Daniel stumbled to the window, pushed the curtain aside, and blinked. It looked like a movie set. The entire street was lit up like midday, thanks to giant portable floodlights, bulldozers, excavators, cement mixers. All of them lined up with the same logo, Sterling Construction. Workers in hard hats and neon vests moved with purpose. Some were even setting up a command center in the vacant lot next door. And at the center of it all, a tall man in an expensive suit, standing completely out of place in the middle of it all, directing everyone, calm, confident, commanding. Daniel's heart was pounding now. "Mr. Dalton," he said slowly, "what the hell is going on?" "The man in the suit," Dalton said, "says his name is Richard Sterling." Daniel nearly dropped the phone. Everyone in the state knew that name. Richard Sterling, billionaire, owner of the largest construction firm in 3 states, the man behind half of Indianapolis's skyline. "Tell him," Daniel said, already scrambling for pants in the dark. "Tell him I'll be right down." 3 minutes later, Daniel stepped out onto the floodlit sidewalk. And for a moment, he thought he was dreaming. The entire block had been transformed. Construction vehicles surrounded the street, workers moved like clockwork, and the floodlights made every surface glow. Neighbors had gathered on balconies and in windows, staring in disbelief. Even a police cruiser sat at the end of the block. But the officer inside seemed to be doing nothing but watching. The man in the suit turned as Daniel approached. A weathered face, sharp eyes, presence that filled the space around him. "Daniel Sullivan?" "Yes," Daniel replied, automatically shaking the hand offered to him. "Mr. Sterling, what is all this?" Richard Sterling studied him for a beat before answering. "You were arrested yesterday," he said, "for helping a homeless woman, Evelyn Winters." He said it like a statement, not a question. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, but how do you know her name?" "Because I've been searching for Evelyn Winters for 7 years," Sterling said. Daniel's mouth opened slightly, confusion mounting. "Why?" Sterling nodded toward a sleek black SUV parked nearby. "Let's talk in private." Still dazed, Daniel followed him into the vehicle. Inside, the air conditioning was cool, the leather seats soft, and the chaos outside felt like another world. Sterling pressed a button. Privacy glass slid into place. And then, without pause, he began. 7 years ago, my daughter, Claire, was working one of my job sites during a college internship. She wanted to learn construction from the ground up. There was an accident. A support beam collapsed. She was impaled by rebar and bleeding out. Daniel swallowed, already chilled despite the heat. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "The on-site medics said she wouldn't survive. But there was a volunteer doctor there that day, someone from a mobile medical outreach program." He paused. "That woman was Evelyn Winters." Daniel stared. "She's a doctor?" "Not just a doctor," Sterling said quietly. "She was one of the most gifted trauma surgeons in the country. And that day, she saved Claire's life in the dirt with nothing but a first aid kit and her hands. She did what no one else could." Daniel thought of Evelyn's calm voice, her composed posture, her clean hands. It suddenly all made sense. What happened to her? Sterling looked down. "After Claire recovered, I tried to find Evelyn to thank her, to help her. But she was gone. Years later, I found out she'd had a breakdown. She'd started showing up to work drunk, erratic. No one knew how to handle it, so they took her license and she disappeared again." "Until yesterday," Daniel said slowly. "Exactly," Sterling confirmed. "Your arrest hit the local paper. There was a photo. She was in the background." Daniel nodded slowly, remembering the crowd that gathered as Officer Brooks cuffed him. "So, all of this," he gestured toward the floodlit chaos outside, "is for her?" "Partly," Sterling replied, "but also for you." "Me?" Daniel frowned. Do you know what the heat index was when you were arrested yesterday? 115th. And you were tackled to the ground for giving food and water to a homeless woman, a doctor, a woman who saved my daughter's life. Sterling's voice tightened. I've spent years trying to repay a debt, and instead, I find the woman who saved Claire living on the streets, while decent people like you are being punished for showing her kindness. Daniel stayed silent. There were no words. So I made some calls, Sterling continued. Learned about your diner, your dad, what this town's become, how the business association is more interested in flower pots than people. And now, you're building something? Daniel asked, still trying to make sense of it all. A small smile flickered across Sterling's face. By sunrise, every news outlet in the state will be here. Headline billionaire launches emergency project in small town after Good Samaritan's arrest. We've already filed the permits with the state, bypassing your local zoning board entirely. What are you building? A medical clinic? Sterling said. Free care for the homeless and uninsured. Right in the empty lot next to your building. He paused. And if she's willing. I want Evelyn to run it. Daniel stared, overwhelmed. I appreciate this, but my diner, I barely have enough customers to stay open after what happened. That's why I'm offering you a contract, Sterling said. Guaranteed minimum monthly orders from the clinic. Enough to stabilize your business. Think of it as a partnership. A way to rebuild your reputation. Not charity, Daniel. Business. And maybe a little justice. He handed Daniel a sleek business card. My lawyers will call you tomorrow. Daniel looked down at the card, stunned. And Evelyn? Where is she now? At the hospital, Sterling said. She collapsed after your arrest, but someone called an ambulance. She's recovering. Guilt hit Daniel like a wave. Is she going to be okay? Physically, yes. The rest, time will tell. Sterling checked his watch. Press will be arriving soon. I'd appreciate it if you stood with me. United. United against what? Daniel asked quietly. Sterling looked him in the eye. Against the kind of thinking that criminalizes compassion. Against the Gregory Nashes of the world, who care more about real estate than people. Outside the SUV, the lot was becoming a construction site in full swing. Trucks, crews, energy, momentum. And a small crowd was gathering to watch. Daniel thought of his father, who built the diner as a place where anyone could get a meal and a little dignity. He thought of Evelyn, who saved a life and lost everything. He thought of how one small act of kindness had started all of this. He looked at Sterling. I'll stand with you, he said at last. Sterling nodded. Good. And tomorrow, we begin changing the story this town tells about itself. As they stepped out of the SUV, Daniel heard the roar of bulldozers. The night still burned with heat. But for the first time in weeks, Daniel felt hope. As Daniel stepped out into the floodlit street, the surreal scene hit him all over again. Bulldozers roared. Workers shouted. Steel clanged. But beyond it all, something had shifted. Across the barricade, Gregory Nash stood red-faced, arguing with a security guard, trying desperately to get past. Not far behind him, Officer Brooks was speaking with a woman in a blazer, her notepad open. Clearly a reporter. Brooks's face had gone pale. Daniel took it in silently. For the first time since his arrest, he felt the momentum was no longer against him. He looked toward the diner. Small, old, fading, but still standing. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Julia. News crew's here. Want me to open the place? Daniel smiled. Absolutely, he texted back. As the sun began to rise, the town of Milltown woke up to something it hadn't seen in years. Headlines, cameras, action. Reporters flooded in, photos snapped. The new clinic project was all anyone could talk about, and Daniel stood beside Richard Sterling, shaking hands in front of a massive banner. Building compassion. Rebuilding community. The diner, once nearly empty, filled up by mid-morning. Curious locals, old customers, new faces, all wanting to see the man who stood up for what was right. At the back booth, old Joe gave Daniel a nod and lifted his coffee mug. "Your dad would be proud." Daniel nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. By noon, a camera crew was inside, filming a segment about a small-town diner that refused to look away. And outside, Sterling stood, giving interviews. While across the street, Gregory Nash stormed off in defeat, unable to spin the story in his favor. That afternoon, Daniel drove to the hospital. Evelyn was resting, her cheeks still pale from heat exhaustion. But her eyes lit up when she saw him walk through the door. "I was worried," Daniel said softly. "I know," she replied. "I heard everything." He sat beside her. "Sterling wants you to run the clinic." Evelyn looked down, silent for a long time. "I don't know if I can," she said at last. "You already did, once," Daniel said. "You saved his daughter's life. You've got nothing left to prove, but maybe something left to give." A long pause. Then Evelyn gave the smallest nod. "Then we do it together," she whispered. And so they did. By the end of the week, the diner had tripled its business. Construction on the clinic went on night and day. Local politicians tried to take credit. But everyone knew who started it. Not a billionaire, not a mayor, a man who gave a sandwich and a bottle of water and refused to back down. Sometimes, standing up for what's right comes at a cost. But sometimes, it brings a community back to life. And sometimes, a little kindness becomes the spark that changes everything. Love this story? Tap that like button, subscribe for more stories that matter, and don't forget to watch the next video on your screen. You won't believe where that story goes. See you in the next one.